Welcome back to the next episode where we are talking about the higher education, and we are in conversation with Professor Satinder Dhiman, Chair and Director of MBA program at Woodbury University, Burbank, California. Hearty welcome, Professor Sir.
Thank you, Sharma.
What an energy you have given in the last two episodes to me. I'm totally charged. Okay. In this episode, I would like to take the conversation further, and those that are going to watch this particular episode would like to give a little recapitulation also. In the first episode, you talked about the research and you talked about Vedic culture and how that has to be part of higher education. Then second episode, you talked about work ethics, and you emphasized that in case if we are really keen to help out the Indian management higher education system, then we should revamp our syllabi. Our education system needs a lot of good, thorough research work, and our teachers, our educators, our professors, they all got to be associated. In this episode, Professor Saab, I'm very, very keen that you being, the chair and director of the MBA program at the Woodbury University, and you gave us some input how you're trying to have the case studies, helping some of the entrepreneurship projects also over there. In this episode, kindly give us, if our professors, our teachers, they take some kind of a research project, first point is that how to select a research project. What relevance it should have. Should it have to the Indian context, or should it have the Asian context, or should it have the universal appeal? Okay. Having taken the topic, please give us the steps which they should follow, how they should carry out the thorough research. Today's episode especially, we are dedicating to what kind of research is required in management education, relevance, and if you can have a little more tilt to services sector, I shall be more grateful to you.
Sure. First of all, we have to start at the very beginning. As I said, in India, still that culture of doing a PhD. As I said, in the US, you cannot become a full-time faculty member at an accredited university if you do not have a full PhD.
Okay.
Not only, now if you have a PhD doesn't mean that you are done. That means that you have the knowledge, you have the framework to do research, but you also have to keep doing research year after year after year. It is not that you have PhD, that is good for life, none of that. Every year you have to publish some article, you have to write a book chapter, depending on your interest and your own inclination. Or some people write books. I personally prefer to write books. I have
You have more than about 25 books.
I have been very fortunate if I take into account the translations of some Indian scriptures I have done, into account, and also the books that I published in India before I went to the United States in the field of accounting and management. And then my publications over the last 30 years in the US. I do have a portfolio of more than 25 books.
Heartiest congratulations. Wonderful.
And what it has taught me, it has made me aware of what is happening in the field. I want to become relevant when I teach. I don't want to teach 50-year-old stuff, so for that research has to be done. Now, if somebody has done a PhD, one of the basic things, as you very well know yourself, is that they teach you about research methodology. How do you conduct research? So the very first thing that you have to decide as a researcher is whether you want to do research in qualitative or quantitative field. Now, for example, you are a marketing professor. You want to know the spending habits or the preferences of some people for a particular product. The best research design could be survey. You may send survey to 1,000, 2,000, 5,000 people, and 10-20% response, then you compile information. You can have a computer program do the analysis. That is called quantitative research. It has a great validity in certain fields. But when it comes to leadership, you cannot conduct too much of quantitative research. Why? Because leadership is something, is sort of intangible. Many people have tried to study what separates a top leader from an ordinary leader. What are the qualities? But I don't think that there is a definitive answer out there. because it's not a quantifiable thing. How do you quantify somebody's character? How do you quantify somebody's grit, as you were mentioning?
Yes, Angela D. from the United States, wonderful.
So how do you quantify that? So in that field, in that domain, research domain, qualitative research. For example, my research, my first doctorate and the second PhD were basically qualitative based. Why? Because we are talking about certain traits which do not lend themselves to quantification.
Just for my curiosity, what was the topic of your first research and what was there for the second project?
Sure, my first research, my first doctorate was in the field of organizational leadership. It was a doctorate in education, but in organizational leadership.
Context was leadership.
Right. How do you run an education institution? That was what my degree was. How do you lead an organization which is like an education institution? And my topic was, you may recall a topic back like 20-25 years ago called Total Quality Management, TQM. So at that time, I was one of the first people who applied to TQM. Was mostly a manufacturing concept. I applied that to service sector, which is education service sector. So to make the long story short, my first dissertation was, doctorate dissertation was on the field of the application of total quality management to higher education. That was my research. So I interviewed university presidents because it was a qualitative and quantitative, mixture of quantitative and qualitative. I did some survey, which I designed myself, and then I did some in-depth interviews of university presidents. I asked them a very simple question. I said that this is where your institution is now, point A, and this is what total quality management system says. What are the challenges? If you're a leader or university president, what are the challenges you feel or face moving from point A to point B? Right? So I did my dissertation based on that. My second research was, now after that, although I was trained as an accountant, and when I was in India, I wrote a book on management accounting, which was kind of considered one of the 5 top books in India at the time, and it did a good work in that field. But when I went to the United States, my research increasingly focused on leadership.
Okay.
In my second doctorate, I also had 20 years of experience teaching spirituality, workplace spirituality, ethics type courses in an MBA program. So I wanted to focus on that. And I also had a great admiration for Buddhist psychology.
Okay.
So what I did was, in my second doctorate, I applied Buddhist psychology to management.
Okay.
What can Buddhist psychology, because Buddhism is not a typical religion, it is a psychology, it is a science of the mind.
Very interesting.
Very science of the mind.
Yeah, we will get into the detail of this little further after some time.
Right.
But today, in this episode, kindly help us out. We come back to the research once again.
Sure. So you asked me about my topic of research.
Thank you.
Those were the topics. So my second doctorate was on mindfulness, which is a very important topic. So as I was saying, there is quantitative and there is qualitative research. So first of all, the researcher has to decide which particular type of research orientation will be suitable for the project he or she has. Once that is decided, then we are looking at doing the actual research. Now, these days, as you mentioned, a lot of information is available. Almost all information is available online. There are full text databases. You do not have to move an inch from where you are, and you have access to the same database as somebody at Harvard has or Stanford has, right? Somebody in India, a professor in India, has same access to the databases that somebody at Harvard has.
So now how you make use of it.
Right, there's no need to feel impoverished that you are in India and So the point I'm trying to make is,
that's a very good point which you have mentioned, and I think our viewers particularly our youth, our students, those are doing this research, and at the same time the teachers also, or academicians, those are associated, they should feel very happy that the internet and particularly technology has brought the whole world as a global village on one common platform.
Right. It is a great leveler.
Yes.
It has leveled the playing field.
Yes.
Because you in India and somebody in Europe or America has same access.
Yes.
Now, what can we do in the Indian context? That is the question.
Yes.
If is this the broad outline of research, what can Indian system do? First of all, we have to develop infrastructure. By infrastructure, I mean we have to create PhD granting institutions which grant PhD in the part-time, in the evening or on the weekend. So that a teacher, for example, teacher at your university may have the opportunity to join a PhD program locally, and they can do it in the evening or on the weekend while teaching here full-time.
Okay.
So we have to create a infrastructure. Secondly, we also have to make sure that the quality is maintained.
Okay.
We don't want PhD to be a diploma mill.
Yeah.
You know, people.
We should not be compromised on that.
Yeah. You know, somebody can pay their way into buying a degree.
Yeah.
So there has to be some checks and balances. The UGC has to chime in. Other bodies, some accrediting bodies have to make sure that the PhD program has.
And the topic has to be relevant to today's market, or today's scenario, or future scenario.
That is a given.
Yeah.
That's a given. I do not want to do research which is not relevant.
Yes.
That will be waste of time and resources, right? That is what the researcher has to make sure. But first of all, we have to provide enabling conditions. We have to enable those people. So that's what I use the word infrastructure. Once the infrastructure is in place, once the opportunities are in place, once there is a system that you can sponsor, or a company can sponsor somebody. So partially from my own funds and partially from your own employer, you get the opportunity to complete, because PhD can be expensive. So there's a fee involved. So you develop an infrastructure. After that, there has to be research culture at the school. Now, if you have faculty member and if they do some research, like publish a paper or present a paper, and the institute doesn't give them any credit for that, like merit pay or some bonus or some funding, then they lose motivation. That's what I call infrastructure.
Okay.
Once that is in place, then what you have to do is the universities have to build a research component in the promotion structure.
Okay.
For example, if I want to get promoted from assistant professor to associate, from associate to full professor, or move in the ranks, then there should be something that I have to do what I call intellectual contribution, which is research. We don't have that. I don't think that the system is that developed or nuanced in India. So the Indian education system has to provide opportunities for people to do research, but also reward them also.
Okay.
If you don't reward people, don't do it.
Yeah.
There's a very simple theory in management.
Yes.
Management theory is,
everybody needs recognition.
if you want something, put it in the reward system.
Yes.
People will do it.
Yes.
So we have to create infrastructure, and we also have to create opportunities to make research lucrative, attractive. Otherwise, people won't do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. So now, when I'm talking about services sector, let's take it. And when I talk about Indian perspective, there are some areas which are emerging very fast. Like tourism is one of the very important sector. And if I'm giving it a relevance now, let's link up with your second PhD which you have got. Let me just touch that topic here itself. You talked about Buddhism, right? So when I talk about Buddhism, or when I talk about a research related to Buddhism, at present in Indian context, there are 3-4 things which we have to take into consideration. Number one, if I am given an opportunity, I would be keen about it, how to increase the Buddhist pilgrimage inflow to India, because like you have got Makkah to Muslims, similar with Bodh Gaya to Buddhist.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So my interest would be, how do I have more and more inbound Buddhist pilgrims or Buddhist tourist or Buddhist tourism, whatever name you would like to give it. How do I bring more inflow of Buddhism? And if you feel appropriate, I wish to share with you if it gives us some relevance, and then further we can build it up on that. Japan is number one as far as the tourists, those are coming to India to visit India for Buddhism, that is from Japan, they come to Bodh Gaya. So if I want to link up, let's take it Japan, Buddhism, tourism, pilgrimage, Bodh Gaya and research together.
Sure. You see, you have to also appreciate the history behind why Japan in this context.
Yeah.
Buddhism, as we know, started in India, and then it during 5th or 6th century or around that, it went to China. And then from China it goes to Japan. In Japan we don't have what we call Buddhism, which we have in Sri Lanka or Burma. Japan has its own version, it's called Zen. Now look at the etymology of the word Zen. The word for meditation in Buddhism is dhyana. It's an Indian word. It's an Hindi word or Sanskrit word, dhyana. Now when dhyana went to China, they had difficulty in pronouncing the word. So they made dhyana into chana. Dhyana, chana. And then when chana went to Japan, they had difficulty in speaking and they made chana into zen. Chan, zen, chan, zen. So this is how the phonetics work.
I never knew about it.
Yeah. So Zen is a Japanese name or a word for a Chinese word, for an Indian word, for meditation. Right? So now, meditation is something which in the modern time, everybody feels stress, right? Everybody is stressed out when you go home, the traffic and the life and the economics and the...
Life is full of hustle and bustle.
Every moment we are collecting stress.
Yes.
Right? Every moment.
And then so much of information is being flooded by technology.
That also creates stress. It's like overload.
Social media.
Right. So that's why meditation has become a very popular fad. But it has something good going for it. Why? Because corporations are realizing that if our workers are stressed out, there will be absenteeism, there will be turnover, right? So why not provide them certain strategies where they can relax, during company time. So there are companies in the US, for example, like Ford and the rest of it, where they have a meditation room. Call it prayer room, meditation room, in the company. Where
at the workplace section.
Where you can go for 10-15 minutes and sort of just decompress. Decompress.
Yes.
Right? So meditation is another example. Buddhism has certain resonance. Right? Because meditation is not Buddhist. Nobody will say, oh, I don't like meditation because it's Buddhist. Meditation is universal. There is some sort of focusing, relaxation technique that, or some sort of stabilization of mind technique that we in Bhagavad Gita we find a verse in chapter 6 where Lord Krishna tells Arjuna, Atma samsthit mana kritva na kinchit api chinte shane shane upramed. He says that slowly and slowly, shane shane upramed, try to disengage your mind and then establish your mind in yourself, in your Atma. And then don't think about anything else. This is the definition Bhagavad Gita gives. Only very few words. Atma samsthit mana kritva. Establish your mind in your Atma. That's the definition. Now when that happens, we feel calm. We feel joy. We feel happy. And happiness is the purpose of life. Many people, many philosophers have concluded, and everybody knows that. If you ask somebody, what's the purpose of your life? There may be 8 billion answers. But if you go a little further, everybody wants to do something because they want to be happy. People want to get married because they think they will be happy. They then, after marriage, they want to have children. We think that they will be happy. All those children bring their own stress, so to speak. So everybody is working for one goal, which is happiness. And meditation is a way of calming the mind.
And you use the word somewhere, gross happiness?
Yeah, there is a like Bhutan has a gross happiness index. That is an interesting concept. I think the world needs to move towards.
So, sir, should I go back to that question? Japan, Buddhism,
Yes.
Japanese tourist, pilgrimage,
Right.
India, both Gaya.
Right. See, once you have the understanding, once you have the pieces in place, India, as I said earlier, is a basic spiritual country. Everything people do, whether they know it or not, has some spiritual basis or angle, so to speak. Yes, angle is the word. Now, because of that, Buddhism will fit in very, very naturally. Now, when Buddhism fits in very, very naturally, and because we have Bodh Gaya, which has its own historical importance, so it is a natural place of tourism. And I think that working with Japan, we can capitalize on this opportunity.
Okay.
And I have no doubt that the future belongs to. There is another thing which is very good about Buddhism, and understand, I'm not a Buddhist, nothing to sell.
Yeah.
But I think that Buddhism is a very rational religion, very rational. And also, it is about mind training. You have to train your mind. And everybody knows it is not the outer circumstances which really matter. It is how I react.
Yes.
So Buddhism teaches that, how to develop that calmness, samta, so to speak. So in India, because of Bodh Gaya, and India because of Buddhism has its root right here, I think that the tourism is a great prospect, and I think that we should capitalize on it.
And we can think of that our chamber, along with the Buddhist Society, which we have got the main body, the World Buddhist Foundation in Japan.
Yes.
We can work together and we can request you to be a part of the whole process with us, and under your leadership we can take up some projects.
Sure, I will love to be a part of this wonderful project.
And I would also request you, because now you have given the secret to us that your second PhD is related to Buddhism, give us some material which we can share with the audience.
Sure.
On our ICSI India.in website as well.
Yeah, I can send some snippets from time to time.
Yes. So this particular episode we have dedicated to research. How would you like to conclude now?
Well, I would sort of request that the Indian government looks into creating infrastructure first for research, because if we have the dream of making India a Vishwaguru, the place to start, there are two places to start. One is 10+2, and that's a totally different field.
Yes.
And I do have, personally speaking, I do have a blueprint for that. How to completely, see, overhauling is not going to do it.
Yeah.
We need a complete reinvention of the 10+2 education.
Okay, overhauling is not...
No. The system is broken. It is beyond overhauling.
Okay.
It's broken. We, unfortunately, have been fed on the British, the colonial, the model. Whereas we have our homespun heritage. So my plea to Indian government is that we look into our own Vedic heritage. We extract best of the best from our Vedic heritage, and then create a curriculum first in the schools, and then build it on into that. That's where research is really needed. And research, as you very well said, has to be relevant. The professors who are doing research, teachers who are doing research, have to make sure. But infrastructure has to be there, opportunities have to be there, and faculty has to be rewarded properly. Okay. Infrastructure has to be there, resources has to be there, and the faculty they have to be rewarded suitably. Right. The compensation which has to be given so that they feel important, they feel multiply effect of their efforts, whatever they are. If they don't get recognition of research, then why would they do it?
Yeah.
Human nature is like that.
Yes. Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for dedicating this particular episode to research. We'll further continue and we'll move on related to higher education, what is happening globally, what's happening in India, how do we empower our higher education system in India, what all can be done. Thank you very much, Professor Saab. It's such an indeed great pleasure. We are getting the insight from you.
My pleasure indeed.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.